First, let me thank Doug Massey for that wonderful and quite excessive introduction. It is a genuine honor merely to be spoken of so favorably by one of the great scholars of social stratification, immigration, race, and social inequality working today, so thank you, Doug. It is for me a doubly special honor to receive the W.E.B. Du Bois Fellow Award from the American Academy. First, and most obviously, I'm honored because of the history and distinguished connection between the Academy, Du Bois, and scholarship on race broadly understood. This connection includes most prominently the Annals publication in 1898 of Du Bois's classic essay, The Study of Negro Problems. Du Bois made a forceful argument for treating the experience and changing circumstances of African Americans as a genuine sociological opportunity and challenge of special importance, a project that would go on to dominate much of this great scholar's life's work. But secondly, and a little more personal, I was in some ways raised with a sense of an ever-present connection to Du Bois. You see, my mother grew up in Atlanta. From the first grade through graduating from college, she literally walked to the Spelman College campus each day for the better part of a decade as she and her sisters would encounter the man himself and always say, "Good morning, Dr. Du Bois." Often wearing his Hamburg hat, gloves, and occasional cane, he was a very self-possessed man. While no one instructed me to go on and become a sociologist, this experience that I grew up with has always been a piece of my upbringing. I'm particularly happy to receive this award at a point when Du Bois himself is enjoying a remarkable renaissance of relevance across the social sciences. For much of the past 4 or 5 decades, you were more likely actually to find Du Bois taken seriously in courses on literature than in sociology or political science. His most famous book, The Souls of Black Folk, containing sociological elements though it did, was more recognized as a great inspiration in biographical writing to those musing on the notion of double consciousness. And so he becomes remembered mainly until very recently as an essayist and activist, especially for the role he played in founding the NAACP and its journal, The Crisis. But as we know, for much of the early part of his life, Du Bois was a committed empirical social scientist, indeed, inarguably the founding intellectual pioneer of American sociology. In what remains of the few brief moments I have here with Doug still standing there, I want to stress 2 features of the Du Boisian intellectual tradition that have animated my own work. One concerns the central place of racial prejudice in the dynamics of racial inequality. The second concerns the linkage of race and class dynamics, or what I think may be increasingly be termed the dynamics of racial capitalism. On the first point, as Doug's generous introduction said, my work is long centered on the intersection of race, politics, and inequality, with a detailed focus on social psychological questions of the role of racial attitudes, identity, and group culture, in especially black-white relations in the US. There's a clear resonance of my work with the mission for sociology that Du Bois sketched out. Thus, in that 1898 essay, Du Bois specified 2 foundational conditions of the then extant Negro problems. He said blacks were not fully incorporated into the fabric of national life because first, as a mass, they've not reached a sufficiently high grade of culture, a product of enslavement and forced illiteracy, and secondly, they do not share the full national life because they have always existed in America in the context of a conviction, varying in intensity but always widespread, that people of Negro blood should not be admitted into the group life of the nation, no matter what their condition might be. And thereby he evoked the existence of a pattern of pervasive racial prejudice, stereotyping, and enmity as a key structuring feature of the social environment with which African Americans were challenged to endure, adjust, adapt, and to strive to overcome. Although focused centrally on the material conditions of black life itself, Du Bois never wavered far from this analysis. As he would write much later in 1940, his autobiography, Dusk of Dawn, the American Negro, therefore, is surrounded and conditioned by the concept which he has of white people, and he is treated in accordance with the concept they have of him. Thus, a core element of his own work and my own work has been, in the first instance, developing a theoretically informed mapping of changes over time in patterns and implications of attitudes on race in the US. Secondly, to test and elaborate a sociological theory of the basic nature of race prejudice, always wrestling with the full complexities, not settling for simple or sovereign explanations or catchy slogans of the day. The critical ambition has been to suggest that the sort of nuanced and organic view of how racial prejudice relates to and influences the structural positioning of African Americans, as most eloquently spelled out by Du Bois in his classic work, The Philadelphia Negro, remains sorely needed today. Second, and relatedly, I would like to think that my own work, to a degree, and certainly that of many others, contributes to a growing recognition of the basic theoretical importance of understanding the interplay and interaction of class and race dynamics. Certainly, this was one of Du Bois's own important but often overlooked messages. My own group, that is sociologists, our tribe, have a strong taste and preference for reducing race to a putatively more fundamental class or economic dynamic. To the extent the impulse is to do so is rooted in a social constructionist understanding of the concept of race itself, I applaud it and find myself in agreement. However, as Du Bois stressed early in the pages of The Souls of Black Folk, the black experience has always involved a fusion of socially consequential racialized identities and statuses with processes of economic inequality and stratification. As he declared, in reflecting on the evolving consciousness of blacks just a generation beyond the shackles of slavery, quote, "For the first time, he sought to analyze the burden he bore upon his back, that dead weight of social degradation partially masked behind a half-named Negro problem. He felt his poverty without a cent, without a home, without land, tools, or savings. He had entered into competition with rich, landed, skilled neighbors. To be a poor man, of course, is hard. But to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardship." Du Bois always and ever recognized this intersection of class and race, of economy and a person's group identity and boundary creating and maintaining processes. So, for myself, in conclusion, I have toiled over my career to conceptualize, chart, and sensibly interpret changes in racial attitudes, to ground scholarship in an empirically well-specified and tested sociological theory of prejudice as group position, to analyze how racial prejudice and resentment still too often structure much of our political thought and action, and to show how these attitudes, identities, and beliefs contribute to the evolution, but also the persistence of forms of racial inequality. I make no pretense to having made the sort of capacious, manifold, and enduring contributions of a W.E.B. Du Bois, but I'm enormously proud to carry on a piece of the tradition he launched. And of course, I stand before you today greatly honored by the Academy for bestowing this recognition on me. Thank you.